Today I'm going to show you guys the mention automation I've built in N8n that maps Notion page mentions to relation properties. So I've designed this automation to go hand in hand with my knowledge management template. I have a separate video on that whole system, but you can also use this automation in your own setup, and there's a link to the file, the automation file, in the blog post down below. So how this works is it maps these page mentions to different properties in my notes database. So the reason I built this is page mentions are very powerful, right? You can write in line and easily reference other pages and build those connections. But if I view this page at a database level, I have no way of seeing those connections. I need to drill down to the page level to be able to see that I'm talking about these tools, I'm mentioning this node, and I'm referencing that tag. So this automation just maps these mentions to a relation property. So I'll just show you guys how it works first, and then we can get into the weeds. So you can copy the link to the block like this, or else you can just go in and press Alt-Shift-L to copy the link. And this is the trigger I've used, the automation, but you can use whatever trigger you want. So this is just a way in my system for me to be able to say, I'm finished with this node. Let's map the relations. So we'll give this a couple of seconds. That actually happens really, maybe I already had that mapped, I wasn't paying attention. But yeah, you can see the relations come true. So we've got N8n, Notion, the automation tag, and the reference to the test note as well. And this automation is also pulling in a word count, which is just something extra as well. So let's jump over to N8n and show you what exactly we're doing here. Yeah, so this is N8n. This is the one we just ran. So this is N8n. If you're not familiar with it, it's an automation tool. It's very low code, so you can build pretty powerful automations with APIs, AI, without having a huge amount of code knowledge, without having any code knowledge. This automation doesn't have any code in it. There's Make.com and Zapier and a couple others that do something similar. What I like about N8n is that it has the option to self-host the tool for free, which is a great option, especially if you're just starting out and trying new tools. So what this automation does, one is it's calling a webhook. I'm not going to click into this node because it will have my URL, but I have set this up in a Notion automation, which I can show you quickly. This is a demo, but the mention automation is sending this webhook, and you will take the webhook that you'll see in here and just populate it in that field. But we'll go more into the setup for you later. Let's just first go into the flow. Okay, we'll start with this branch. So the first thing the automation is doing is getting the content of this page. So you can see, and it's getting the child blocks and pulling in the data. So the reason the get child blocks function is important is primarily that I'm using synced blocks in my system, right? So the actual text block in here is a child of the synced block. It is also important to note that this is the original synced block, and that is something I do consistently throughout my system. The original synced block is always in the note. if you're using the copy of a synced block in your note, you might run into some issues and have to reconfigure the automation a little bit. If you're not using synced blocks in your system, you don't need to worry about that. So that is the first step. I'll touch on this branch really quick because it's the simplest to explain. This does a quick word count. So it's getting the child block content and populating that text into a text property in my notes database. And that's just a property that sits in the back end that I don't really use. I might have it down here somewhere. Yeah. So the text for word count. So it's out of the way. I never look at it. I don't really need it. And then this is a formula property that takes the text for word count and just counts the length of the words. So that's just something extra that this automation does as well. Okay, getting into the main component of it. So you can see getting the node content and we're setting it to these split nodes. Now, these nodes each do something different. They split paragraph text, which is your standard text here. And then the others split bullet text, which we don't have in this example. And you can see that it's not continuing in the flow. It stops here. And then we have the title. So the title isn't actually part of the page content, so we can go straight from the webhook to split the title. And what the split is actually doing is it's separating different elements within the block. So it's separating, taking the title as an example. You can see in the node, it has split it into 3 different items, right? And those 3 items are text, a mention, and more text. So that is all that is doing. And it's the same for the paragraph text. You can see it has 8 items. Text, mention, so on. Okay. You can also add other, you can filter for other blocks here too. I only really use paragraph text and bullets in my notes, but you can add heading text or quotes or whatever other items, whatever other text blocks you want to use. So the next step in the node is a simple if function, and it is filtering to check if the page ID exists. Okay, if the mention page ID. So it's just looking for mentions, and it's going to take those mentions and proceed. And for the ones that fail, there's just a simple do nothing operation. You don't even need to add that. I think it's just a little easier to read in the flow. But we go ahead with dimensions. So the first thing to do, we have found dimension page IDs, and we now want to find the actual database page so that we can get those properties. Okay, so we're looking for the JSON dimension page ID, and we're retrieving the database page. That gives us, easier to read in the JSON, that gives us the full database page with all the properties. Okay, so I'm not sure which page this is at a glance, but yeah, you can see all the property data coming through there. So we have gotten the database page, and now we run to another if node, and I'll explain why this is important. So this is checking if the database ID, so we found our page mention, so say we found N8n, and that is a page in my tools database, which I actually have open here. So that's a page in my tools database. So what this automation is, or what this if node is doing, is checking if the database ID matches the database of our original trigger. So it's checking if the tools database is the same as my notes database, basically, which it's not, obviously. But for this mention, our test note, it will be the same because this test note is also in my notes database. Okay. I don't know why that's popping up, but that's fine. Okay, so we'll go with the most common type. You're mentioning pages across other databases. So now we just want to retrieve the data. We just find the parent database. Okay, so what happens next is you get a new node, and we're looking for database page, and what we're doing this time is updating it. So this is important to note, and I'll touch on this more in the setup later, but we're not actually updating the note page. We're updating the mentioned page. So we're updating N8n, we're updating this page in the tools database. We're not actually updating this note. That's important to keep in mind. So we're finding that page, and we are searching for the notes property. This is important to note. How the automation works requires you to be consistent about what you call the property you want to map to. So I use, for my notes relation across all my databases, I just call the relation notes. So I know that this automation will work every time. So that's the only thing you need to be aware of. Be consistent in what you're using the properties for. And then this code is important. So if I just populate the page ID, right? If I just take the ID of our original trigger page, which is this note, so it would probably be this string here, or actually I have it here. So if I just populate it with that value, I am replacing whatever data was already in that relation property with the new page ID, which is not what I want to do. I want to ensure that this new page ID is just, so this new note is added to my tools note relation, right? So this new page ID is added to the list of page IDs that are already there. And we can see that that has worked. If I go to, this is the N8n page in my tools database, you can see I have a bunch of notes related here. And yeah, you can see that we tested with was just added to it. It didn't replace it. So that's important to keep in mind as well. Yeah, that's why it's really important to be aware of the fact that you're updating the mention page and not the page in your notes database, because you trigger this automation and you'll see, and just look at your note. Yeah, you'll see all the data there and you'll think it looks great. And if you're not taking this step to ensure you're keeping any existing data, you might end up losing data here if you're not careful. That's not something you need to worry about for this, because it's set up to add to the data, and you can just import this into your own N8n setup. So the only other path to follow is for the test note, right? So this test note here, that comes from the same database as my notes, or as this note. They're both notes in my notes database. The reason I have a separate path for this is simply because the property is called something else. The notes relation in my notes database isn't called notes, because that would be confusing. I think I've called it, oh, it's not showing up there, but I think I've called it a line of thought for my own database. I believe in the template, my knowledge management template, It's called connections. If you do get that template, that's just one other thing you'll have to update there, just to change that text to connections, or you can rename the property to whatever you want to call it. So I can see that that's fired as well. I can see the note is related there, and then I have this view of it here as well. And that is more or less how the automation works. If you want to use it, I mentioned earlier, it's linked below. It's in the blog post linked below, right at the bottom of the post. You'll see a link to the file. It's a JSON file, but you can just import that right into your N8n. And to do that, you just go up to the three dots when you start a new workflow, and you'll have the option to import from, you should have the option to import from file. And that's it. That's how it works. How you would want to set this up in your own Notion system, right? How do you want to actually get the automation to trigger the webhook? So this is a caveat to notice, just to be aware of. This template is free, you can use it, but to trigger it, you would need Notion automations, which I think is only available on paid plans. Because even if you duplicate my template, you would need to be able to edit the automation with the correct webhook URL. So I think you would need a paid plan to do that. So that's just something to be aware of. But if you want to set it up, this is what it would look like. This is the example in my knowledge management system, and I'll explain the setup and how it works. Okay, so I want to trigger dimension automation for my notes. I basically just don't want to trigger it for media if I add a picture to a note, because that won't have mentions in the page content, but you can configure that whatever way you like. And then the important one is the linked block is not empty. So the automation will trigger when a page is added to this view. Okay, and what this does, it adds this automation page to a property in my notes database. So I touch on this more in my blueprints system video on why this is important, but the long and short of it is it just gives you a better way to track what automations are affecting what pages across your workspace. But if that template is available for free, or if you use my knowledge system template, this function will be built in, and those properties will already be there. Then you send the webhook. So you'll be looking at your webhook node here and taking the URL to populate here. It's set up to send all the properties. So you'll see all the data. I don't think you need all of them, but I have them all checked there. And then this is the part that I'm kind of betraying my own system on, but I just have it set up this way for convenience sake. So the updated by property, I use this to show me what automations have updated what pages across my database. Here I'm saying that this automation has just updated my notes page, but that's not actually true, right? We mentioned it's not updating my note, it's updating the tool, it's updating this page, it's updating the automation tag page, it's updating the Notion tool page. So that isn't strictly true. The reason I've set it up that way is just to give me, just for convenience sake really, I have about 60 databases in the system, and I didn't want to have separate views of all of those to see. This way I can just see that, yeah, it's triggered from my notes page. I can use that, and I can check the tools page or whatever other page to make sure that looks okay. If you wanted to be more diligent about that, what I would suggest is, instead of having that step in Notion, have it as part of the N8n workflow. So you would add an additional property here, and just use the page ID of this page, of your mention automation page, and add that to the updated by property. And just keep in mind again that you'd want to map the existing relation data and just add the new page ID to it. That is basically how it works. That's pretty much it. The template's available below. Yeah, that's it. It works in the background. You don't have to worry about it. It just works. It takes your mentions and maps them to relations, so you get that nice view at the database level of all that data. So give it a try.